Here is the recap of True Detective: Night Country. The action of the series is set in a small town in Alaska at the moment when the polar night begins. On a scientific research station called Tsalal lives and works 8 scientists. Once they notice one of them acting strangely. He utters the phrase "she has awakened," after which the lights on the station go out. A couple of days later, a man who supplies them with food arrives there, but the room is empty and he finds a severed tongue on the floor. Law enforcement arrives at the station. The chief of police is Danvers, and 2 officers, Hank and his son Peter. They find no signs of violence, only a severed tongue and the writing on the board, "We are all dead." Danvers returns to the police station where Officer Navarro is already waiting for her. She believes this case has something to do with the murder of a girl, Annie, a few years ago. Her tongue was also severed. Navarro was unable to conclude the case then, because she did not find enough evidence. Annie's body was found naked with multiple wounds with an unknown object, and her tongue was never found. We later learned that it was her tongue that was found on the station. Navarro wants to join the investigation into the scientist's disappearance. Danvers refuses her at first, but soon realizes that she could use some extra help. At this time, an elderly hermit woman sees the ghost of her dead husband, who points her in a certain direction. She goes there and discovers the dead scientists, after which she calls the police. When the cops arrive, they are shocked by what they see. Men with a frozen expression of horror on their faces, frozen in ice. All have burst eardrums, some have scratched their eyes out and bitten their limbs. All of them are completely naked, and their clothes are neatly folded a few hundred meters away. Danvers notices a strange spiral symbol on the forehead of one of them. Then suddenly one scientist turns out to be alive and is taken to the hospital. The case turns out to be quite strange and frightening, but Danvers doesn't believe in the supernatural. She goes to her friend's science teacher and asks about what the Tsalal research station was doing. It turns out scientists have been trying for years to find the oldest organisms that can help people cure incurable diseases. They've been drilling through frozen rocks and trying to extract material from there, but due to equipment interference, the samples are constantly deteriorating, and that's why the process is taking so long. Back at the police station, Danvers learns that her boss has decided to turn the case over to the neighboring town, who have more resources and capabilities. However, the Danvers does not want to give up the investigation, so she convinces her boss to give her a couple of days. And the frozen bodies are transported to the hockey field so that they begin to thaw. Let's run through some minor plot lines that don't really affect the story, but thus reveal the characters. Peter has a complicated relationship with his father Hank. The guy has a wife and a small child, but Police Chief Danvers constantly makes him work overtime, which of course his wife doesn't like, and at the end of the season she chases him out of the house. Navarro has a younger sister who has a mental illness. She is only going to get worse. Navarro puts her in a clinic, but she escapes and ends her life by falling through the ice. And finally, Danvers. In the past, she married a guy who already had a daughter. Danvers subsequently gave birth to a son, but the child and her husband were killed in a car accident. With her stepdaughter, they don't live very friendly, and eventually the girl joins protesters against a mine that is poisoning the environment. She is caught by the police several times, which further distances her from Danvers. Also in the future, I won't always mention all the moments where different mystical things happen. There are just too many of them. Just know that for every reasonable scene there is something strange going on. Back to the main plot. The police continue their investigation. They learn that although the clothes of the dead were found, some of them were partially undressed. So what made them leave the station was far worse than freezing cold. The rest of the injuries could be attributed to hyperthermia, but the spiral on their foreheads doesn't fit with all that. A man dying of cold wouldn't draw something on his forehead. Soon, when the corpses defrost a little, Peter discovers that there are only 6 bodies. Remember, there were 8 scientists in total, and one is now in the hospital in serious condition. That leaves one scientist named Clark, who was never found. He's the one who was acting strangely in the beginning. Danvers decides to question the station's janitors, who clean up there a couple times a month, but they don't know anything. They only point to Clark, who has been acting very strangely for a long time. Danvers checks the evidence and discovers that the missing man's jacket is exactly the same as Annie's, who was murdered a few years ago. Clark and Annie had the same spiral tattoo. Turns out they were dating and must have gotten paired tattoos. At this time, Navarro finds a clue. Clark bought a trailer some time ago. Navarro guesses that he bought it so he could secretly date Annie. She eventually finds the trailer, and inside it is a bunch of mystical crap. At this time, the surviving unfrozen man comes to his senses. The protagonists go to the hospital, but he is talking nonsense and says only that they awakened someone. When everyone leaves, Navarro sees something like a ghost again, after which the man dies. Meanwhile, Peter finds a cell phone in Clark's trailer, and it turns out that it belonged to Annie. Soon the protagonists manage to unlock it. There they discover a recording made in the last minutes of the girl's life. She is walking through an ice cave, and suddenly someone drags her out of the frame. They also see the skeleton of some creature frozen in the ice. They learn from the science teacher that it is most likely the skeleton of a whale, but the location of the caves can only be told by a man named Otis, who has explored the local caves in the past. However, he is a drug addict and a petty criminal who has not been seen for a long time. Soon, fishermen inform the police that they saw a man similar to Clark wandering in the snowy wasteland. The protagonists go there and in an abandoned building find a junkie Otis in Clark's jacket. He is also talking nonsense about ghosts and the night country, so they put him in a clinic. When he regains consciousness, he reports that he met Clark, who looked crazy, but Otis refuses to show the entrance to the caves, demanding a dose of illegal substances. Peter discovers a connection between the Tsalal research station and a local mining company that has been poisoning the environment for years. Because of it, some parts of the city have black tap water, and babies are increasingly being born dead. It turns out that Tsalal was sponsored by mine, and Tsalal actually made the findings on its operations and the amount of pollution in the environment. There's a conflict of interest, so Danvers goes to the director of the mine. However, her boss is already waiting for Danvers there and informs her that the case with the scientists is closed. A pathologist came from a neighboring town and concluded that the men died when they were covered by an avalanche, and all the oddities were attributed to hyperthermia. Danvers realizes that her boss is also in cahoots with the mine, but there's nothing she can do about it. When Danvers leaves, the mine director contacts Hank, Peter's father. We learn that they do have something to do with these deaths. The woman orders Hank to kill the junkie Otis, since he's the only one who can lead Danvers to the place where Annie died. Danvers can't give up, so she steals illegal substances from the police station and takes them to Otis. He marks on a map how to get to the caves and agrees to guide her there. That's when Hank arrives at Danvers' house. He kills Otis and wants to finish Danvers off, but Peter stops him by shooting him in the head. The trio tries to figure out what to do next. The plan is for Peter to get rid of his father's corpse so no one will find it. And Otis' body is hidden so that later the police will find it and all the evidence will point to Hank, who just disappeared somewhere. Meanwhile, Danvers and Navarro find the cave where Annie died. There they discover fairly fresh research equipment and a drill, which was used to kill the girl in the past. Climbing up the stairs, they open a secret hatch and get to the Tsalal station. There they discover Clark and, having tied him to a chair, begin to interrogate him. The man admits that their research team discovered what they were looking for a long time ago, but the problem was the frozen samples that their mining equipment was ruining. They realized that the local mine was doing so much environmental damage that the glaciers were beginning to melt themselves, and this would speed up their work hundreds of times. So they conspired with the mining company. They continue to poison the ecology with greater force, and scientists fake all the conclusions about pollution. Turns out Clark really did love Annie. A few years ago, she discovered their collusion with the mine, snuck into a secret lab, and began destroying all of their work. The scientists had killed her by stabbing her with a drill, and Clark had finished her off, since the research was more important to him. Since then, the man began to go crazy, and a few days ago, the lights went out at the station. He realized that the ghost of Annie had come for revenge and hid in the basement. Clark held onto the handle of the hatch for an hour as someone was breaking in. When he climbed out, there was no one else in the station. Danvers still doesn't believe in supernatural powers and leaves for a while. When she returns, she finds that Navarro has allowed Clark to go outside and freeze to death. Before leaving, the women discover a palm print on a manhole without 2 fingers and remember a janitor they interrogated with the same mutilation. They stop by her house, where they meet a crowd of female janitors. We learn that they once discovered a secret lab and learned how Annie, who was close to them, really died. The women decided to get revenge. They turned off the lights at the station and, threatening them with guns, took all the scientists outside. The only one left was Clark, who was holding the hatch handle, so the women couldn't get him. The janitors then forced the men to undress, drew a spiral on the forehead of one of them, remember, it was a tattoo of the dead Annie, and released them into the snowy wasteland. Danvers and Navarro decide not to tell anyone about what these women did, believing that they did the right thing. After a while, a video is leaked online where Clark talks about the mining company and the falsification of reports, which causes the mine to be shut down. Danvers gets closer to his daughter, Peter also reconciles with his wife, and Navarro simply disappears. Of course, the question remains who planted the tongue in the research station, but perhaps ghosts do exist. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the like button. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.